sound came from. Just okay. That software things just went silent. Let's see if that kind of thing happens. Hey, Cubs. How are we doing this evening? Guess I should do the whole sharing thing saying that I'm on. Like the captain said, we're going back into more Brothers Grimm tonight. I don't know why it is every time I start recording, I get the urge to cough. But it is what it is, what it is, what it is. Tweet that I'm on. See if we get any more Cubs popping. So let me get to where I can post. No, full screen. Untitled Twitchies. Okay. La da da, la da dee, la da da, la da doo. Gotta admit, I am nervous for tomorrow's stream. It's tomorrow, roughly mid-afternoon for me, and evening for you guys in Europe. I'm doing my official, not real AW, but it might as well be AW because I haven't done one yet before the stream. I will admit, I'm still not completely prepared. But that's just part of being me. I like doing my impromptu stuff. Okay. It has been tweeted. Now I get to spam it on Discord stuff. Which I really hate spamming on other people's Discord that, hey, I'm streaming, come watch me. I mean, I like being a fairly small YouTuber, but I also kind of want a community. I mean, as much as I like sitting in and watching other people, I like doing my own thing too, you know? I don't expect to ever get famous, and I sure the hell don't plan on ever getting rich. That's what the lottery's for. Which would be completely awesome if I won the lottery for some unknown reason. Okay, I can't tell if that message was from me, because I haven't opened anything to look yet. By the way, I will say it again, the screen stuff going on right now is from Fox Darling. Yep. The message was just about saying I was here. Okay. Chug some cough medicine or something. I do hate posting on other people's sites that pay attention to me. I'm doing stuff too. That's really what it kind of feels like I'm doing. I mean, I know it's self-promotion and all, but just I don't want to do the whole chasing clout thing. Why is my mouth not moving? Hello? Come on. Which do I have to set up for? Okay, I'm switching to headset. Maybe I'll make up the voice a little bit better. Oh, there we go. Yeah, now you can hear me. Well, you can see me saying stuff. Hola, ¿cómo estás, Ed? Ah, sí, sí. ¿Y tú? Ciao. So, reading Brothers Grimm tonight. Do I have... Okay, I don't need the... don't need the desktop audio on right now. How you cubs doing? This is my just chatting screen. Again, it was made by Fox Starling. It's, you know, she's cool like that. And this is another moment I don't really know what I'm doing. Get a little bit closer. Come here. Yeah. So, You want to go ahead and get into the stories? It is Brothers Grimm night. And may or may not have had something to drink. So why don't we go ahead and go to that window, shall we? Yeah. Let's switch over. And wipe too. Did not wipe. Oh crap. We're not doing Norwegian stories today. We're doing Grimm stories today. And of course, nothing's going to be aligned because I can't have nice things. This is what happens when you adjust one screen, because then everything changes to. Okay. I'll get there. Yeah. So, Brothers Grimm. I do have the Pokemon thing going on, so if you get bored listening to me, you can play Pokemon. Ouch. Do have a couple of chatbots out there, so. I don't remember which book we left off on. But since this is kind of my disruptive kids scream, because I expect kids to be disruptive, especially when they don't want to go to bed. Although the wonderful Beano is already snoozing, so I don't have to worry about her coming in. Though she's sleeping, so I don't really want to raid her either. Where's my notepad that I was keeping track of which stories? Okay. Tonight. Damn. I'm not supposed to cough in this alcohol. Frankly, I don't care. I'd rather not cough while I'm reading because I'm coughing in your ears. And coughing in a cub's ears is never a good thing. Sometimes the rest of my cough medicine is expired. But anyway. Drink the cough medicine. What do? You turn around and cough. So. Sound check, sound check. The mic is saying that it's picking up. Which microphone is coming up? Okay, the microphone currently being used is the one on the laptop. That's cool. Let's change that. Now it's going to get real loud because I'm going to change mics. So I'm switching to this one. The one on the headset. Whoa, shit. Sorry, I forgot real loud there. Anyway. Oh, what's this notification on Twitter? Someone retweet me. Nope. Oh, sounds like someone came in. I switch over to screen and see who it is. Come on, computer. Why are you lagging? Why are you lagging so bad, computer? Okay, I could have sworn I heard one of my sound alerts. Because I know they're on.
Hello?
My sound alerts are fried. But anyway. Let's get into the story, shall we? The first story tonight is the tailor who soon became rich. Once, during the winter, a poor tailor crossed over the field to visit his brother. Along the way, he found a frozen thrush. I'm all doing great tonight. Whatever's bigger than a louse, the tailor said to himself. That's what the tailor carries into his house. Well, that's a funky motto. If it's bigger than a louse, I'm taking it inside. Okay. So he picked up the thrush and stuck it in his coat. When he reached his brother's house, he decided to look first through the window to see if he was home. All at once he saw a fat person sitting near his sister-in-law at the table. There was a roast and a bottle of wine sitting on the table. Meanwhile, the tailor's brother was about to return home. He knocked at the door and wanted to enter. From the outside, the tailor saw how the woman quickly hid the parson in a crate, stuck the roast into the oven, and shoved the wine into the bed. Now, since his brother had entered, the tailor didn't wait any longer. He went into the house and greeted his sister-in-law and his brother. Then he sat down on the crate in which the parson was hiding. "Wife, I'm hungry. Do you have anything to eat?" the husband asked. "No, I'm sorry. There's nothing at all in the house today." But the tailor pulled out his frozen thrush, and his brother cried out, "My, what are you doing with that frozen thrush?" "Hey, don't you know that a thrush is worth a lot of money? It can tell the future. It can tell the future and your fortune." "Well, then, let it tell our future and our fortune." The tailor placed it next to his ear and said, "The thrush told me that there's a full dish of roast meat in the oven." Whew. The husband went to the oven and found the roast meat. "What else did the thrush say to you?" "There's a bottle of wine in the bed." "My, I'd like to have this thrush. Sell it to me." "You can have it if you give me this crate that I'm sitting on." The brother wanted to give it to him right away, but his wife said, "No, I'm against it. I'm much too fond of this crate, and I'm not going to give it away." However, the husband said, "What? Are you dumb or something? What is the use of this old crate to you?" So the husband gave his brother the crate for the bird, and the tailor took the crate on a wheelbarrow and began walking on the road. Along the way he said, "I'm going to take the crate and throw it in the water. I'm going to take the crate and throw it in the water." Finally, the parson began moving inside and said, "You know what's in the crate? Let me out and I'll give you some 50 gold coins." "All right, I'll do it for that amount." So he let him out and went home with the money. The people were puzzled as to where he had earned so much money, and he said, "Let me tell you, the skins of animals have become very expensive. So I slaughtered an old cow and received a good deal of money in return." Since the villagers also wanted to profit from this, they went out and cut the throats of all their oxen, cows, and sheep, and carried all the fur and skins to the city,
where, however, they received precious little money for them because there had suddenly been so many skins and fur for sale. Well, the farmers became infuriated about the loss and threw dirt and some other rubbish in the tailor's door. However, he put everything into his crate, went to the tavern in the city, and asked the tavern keeper whether he might store the crate in the place for a while, as it contained many valuable things, and the crate wasn't safe at his home. The tavern keeper said he'd gladly do it, and let the tailor store the crate in the tavern. Some time later, the tailor returned and asked for his crate, and when he opened it to see whether anything was in it, he saw that it was full of dirt. So he threw a violent fit and cursed the tavern keeper, and threatened to take him to court. In response, the tavern keeper, who was concerned about his reputation and was afraid about his credit rating, willingly gave him 100 gold. Wow. The farmers were once again furious that everything that caused problems for the tailor managed to turn him into a profit. So they took the crate and forced him inside. Then they threw the crate into the river and let it float off. The tailor kept quiet for a while until he came to the edge of the land that stuck out in the river. Then he cried very loudly, "No, I'm not going to do it. I won't do it, even if the whole world wants it to be done." A shepherd heard this shouting and asked, "What is it that you won't do?" "Oh," responded the tailor, "there's a king who is a foolish whim who just insists on whoever is able to swim down this river in this crate to marry his only daughter. But I've made up my mind not to do it, even if the entire world wants it." Listen, is it possible that someone else can replace you in the crate and get the princess?" "Oh, yes, that's also possible." "Then I'll replace you." So the tailor stepped out of the crate, and the shepherd got in. The tailor closed the crate, and soon after the shepherd went down under in the crate. Meanwhile, the tailor took the shepherd's entire herd of sheep and went home. The farmers wondered what happened to returned. Moreover, they were puzzled now that he had so many sheep. So the tailor explained to him, "I'd sunk in the water, deep, deep down, and when I got to the bottom, I found this entire herd, and took the sheep back home with me." The farmers wanted to fetch some sheep as well. And they all went together to the river. The sky was completely blue on the day with small white clouds, and consequently, when they looked into the water, they cried out, "We already see the lambs at the bottom." Idiots. "I want to be the first one under," the mayor said. "I'll look around, and if everything's all right, I'll call you." As he dove into the river, the water rustled and murmured, "Bloomp." The others thought he was calling out for them to jump, so they all jumped in one after another. In the end, the entire village belonged to the tailor. Morons. The common clay of the Old West. Oh. Yeah. Idiots. So many of them. Sorry, Cubs. Checking messages again. My computer's running so slow. Not at all going to make me more paranoid for the debut tomorrow. Okay. Nothing going on for me. There are 97 people watching Bino sleep. Craziness. Okay, next story. Bluebeard. Not to be confused with Blackbeard, or Bluebird, or Blackbird, or Ladrid. Anyway, Bluebeard. There once was a man who lived in a forest with his 3 sons and beautiful daughter. One day, a golden coach drawn by 6 horses, was attended by several servants, came driving up to his house. After the coach stopped, a king stepped out and asked him if he could have his daughter for wife. The man was happy that his daughter would benefit from such a stroke of good fortune and immediately said yes. There was nothing objectionable about the suitor except for his beard, which was totally blue, and made one shudder somewhat whenever one looked at it. At first the maiden also felt frightened by it, and resisted marrying him, but her father kept urging her, and finally she consented. However, her fear was so great that the first went to her brothers and took them aside, and said, "Dear brothers, if you hear me scream, leave everything standing or lying wherever you are, and come to my aid." The brothers kissed her and promised to do this. "Farewell, dear sister. If we hear your voice, we'll jump on our horses and soon be at your side." Then she got into the coach and sat down next to Bluebeard and drove away with him. When she reached his castle, she found everything splendid, and whatever the queen desired was filled. They could have been very happy together if only she had been able to get accustomed to herself to the king's blue beard. However, whenever she saw it, she felt frightened. After some time had passed, he said to her, "I must go on a long journey. Here are the keys to the entire castle. You can open all the rooms and look at everything, but I forbid you to open one particular room, which this little golden key can unlock. If you open it, you will pay for it with your life." Seems to be a running thing in these stories. She took the key and promised to obey him. Once he had departed, she opened one door after another and saw so many treasures and magnificent things that she thought they all must have been gathered from every corner of the world. Soon nothing was left but the forbidden room. Since the key was made of gold, she believed that it must be the most precious thing were probably kept in there. Her curiosity began to gnaw at her, and she certainly would have passed over all the other rooms if she had only seen what was in this one. At last her desire became so great that she took the key and went into the room. "Who can possibly see when I open it?" she said to herself. "I'll just glance inside." Then she unlocked the room, and when the door opened, a stream of blood flowered over her, and she saw dead women hanging along on all the walls, some only skeletons. Her horror was so tremendous that she immediately slammed the door, but the key popped out of the lock and fell into the blood. Swiftly she picked it up and tried to wipe away all the blood, but to no avail. When she wiped the blood away on one side, it appeared on the other. She sat down and rubbed the key thoroughly out the day, and tried everything possible, but nothing helped. The bloodstains could not be erased. Finally, in the evening, she stuck it in some hay, which was supposed to be able to absorb the blood. Well, there's a cleaning tip. Blood absorbs hay. The following day, Bluebeard came back, and the first thing he requested was the bunch of keys. Her heart pounded as she brought the keys, and she hoped that he wouldn't notice the golden one was missing. However, he counted all of them, and when he was finished, he said, "Where's the key to the secret room?" As he said this, he looked straight into her eyes, causing her to blush red as blood. "It's upstairs," she answered. misplaced it. Tomorrow I'll go and look for it. You'd better go now, dear wife. I need it today. Oh, I might as well tell you. I lost it in the hay. I'll have to go and search for it. You haven't lost it, Bluebeard said angrily. You stuck it in there so the hay would absorb the bloodstains. It's clear that you disobeyed my command and entered the room. Now you'll enter the room whether you want to or not. Then he ordered her to fetch the key, which was still stained with blood. Now prepare yourself for your death. You shall die today, Bluebeard declared. He fetched his big knife and took her to the threshold of the house. Just let me say my prayers before I die, she said. Go ahead then, but you'd better hurry. I don't have much time to waste. She ran upstairs and cried out the window as loud as she could. Brothers, dear brothers, come help me. The brothers were sitting in the forest and drinking some cool wine. The youngest said, I think I heard our sister's voice. Let's go, we must hurry and help her. They jumped on their horses and rode like thunder and lightning. Meanwhile, their sister was on her knees, praying in fear. Well, are you almost done? Bluebeard called from below. He heard him sharpening the knife on his bottom step. She looked out the window and could only see a cloud of dust as if a herd were coming, so she screamed once more, Brothers, dear brothers, come help me. And her fear became greater and greater when Bluebeard called, If you don't come down soon, I will be up to get you. My knife's been sharpened. She looked out the window again and saw her three brothers riding across the field as though were birds flying through the air. For the third time she screamed desperately with all her might, Brothers, dear brothers, come help me. The youngest brother was already so near that she could hear his voice. Calm yourself. Another moment, dear sister. We'll soon be at your side. But Blackbeard cried out, That's enough praying. I'm not going to wait any longer. If you don't come down, I'm going to fetch you. Oh, please let me pray for my three dear brothers. However, he wouldn't listen to her. Instead, he went upstairs and dragged her down. Then he grabbed her by the hair and was about to plunge the knife into her heart when the three brothers knocked at the door, charged inside, and tore their sister out of his hands. Then they drew out their sabers and cut him down. Afterward, he was hung up in the bloody chamber next to all the women he had killed. Later, the brothers took their dear sister home with them, and all of Bluebeard's treasures belonged to her. Would that be inheritance, since she suddenly became a widow? He was a king. What happened to all of his people? Inquiring readers want to know. Oh well. Next story. The Golden Children. Okay, the Golden Children. Once upon a time there lived a poor man and a poor woman who had nothing but a little hut. The husband was a fisherman, and one day he was sitting by the water's edge and cast out his net. He caught a goldfish, and the fish said, If you throw me back into the water, I'll turn your little hut into a splendid castle. And in the castle there will be a cupboard. When you open it, you'll find dishes of boiled and roasted meat in them, as much as you desire. But you may not tell anyone in the world how you came by your good fortune. Otherwise, you will lose it all. The fisherman threw the fish back into the water, and when he came home, a huge castle was standing where otherwise his hut usually stood. and his wife sat in the middle of a splendid room. The man was very pleased by this, but he wanted to eat something. "Wife, give me something to eat," he said. "I'm tremendously hungry." However, his wife answered, "I don't have a thing. I can't find anything in this large castle. Just over there in the cupboard." When his wife opened the cupboard, she found cake, meat, fruit, and wine. Lots of wine. "What more could my heart desire?" His wife was astonished, and then she said, "Tell me, where in the world did this treasure and riches come from all of a sudden?" "I'm not allowed to tell you. If I tell you, our good fortune will vanish." After he said this, his wife became only more curious, and she kept asking him and tormenting him, and didn't allow him any peace day and night until he finally revealed to her that everything came from a golden fish. No sooner had he said this than the castle and all his rich treasures vanished, and the fisherman and his wife were once again sitting in the old fishing hut. You ever think some of these stories are like telling wives to just not question where guys get money? Anyway, continuing. Now the man had to resume his work all over again, and he fished and fished until he caught the golden fish once more. The fish promised the fisherman that, again, if he let it go free, the fish would give him a beautiful castle and the cupboard full of boiled and roasted meats, but only on one condition, that he remained silent about who granted the favor. His wife already knows. Well, the fisherman held out for a while, but eventually his wife tormented him so drastically that he revealed the secret. And in that very moment, they sat once again in their shabby hut. So the husband went fishing again, and fished, and he caught the golden fish a third time. "Listen," said the fish, "take me home with you, and cut me into 6 pieces. Give 2 to your wife to eat, 2 to your horse, and plant 2 in the ground. You'll reap a blessing by doing this. Your wife will give birth to 2 golden children, your horse will produce 2 golden fowls, and 2 golden lilies will grow from the earth." Yeah. The fisherman obeyed, and the fish's prophecy came true. Soon the 2 golden children grew and became 2 strong young men. "Father," they said, "we want to set out into the world. We'll mount our golden horses, and you'll be able to see the golden lilies how we're doing. If they're fresh, then we're healthy. If they wilt, we're sick. If they perish, we're dead." Upon saying this, they rode off and came to an inn where there were many people inside. When the people saw 2 golden children on golden horses, they began to make fun of them. In turn, the young men became angry, and one of them became ashamed and turned around and rode home. However, the other continued to ride on and came to a forest. But the people outside the forest told him that he shouldn't enter because it was full of robbers, and they would attack him. But the golden boy wouldn't let himself be scared by that. "I must and shall go through the forest." He took a bearskin and covered himself and his horse with it, so that nothing more of the gold could be seen. Then he rode into the forest. Soon thereafter he heard something calling out from the woods. "Here's one." Then another voice spoke. "Let him go. What should we do with a bearskin? He's as poor and empty-handed as a church mouse." So this is how the golden young man escaped the robbers and rode into a village, where he saw a maiden who was so beautiful that he couldn't imagine any other maiden as beautiful as she was in the whole world. So he asked her to marry him, and the maiden said yes, and she would remain true to him for the rest of her life. So they held the wedding and were happy. Then the father's bride came home, and when he saw his daughter had married a loafer in a bearskin, for he hadn't taken off the bearskin, he became angry and wanted to murder the bridegroom. However, the bride pleaded as best she could and told her father that she loved the man in the bearskin very much, and after all, he was her husband. Finally, the father calmed down, and the next morning he got up and wanted to see his son-in-law one more time. And all at once he saw a splendid golden young man lying in bed. But his bridegroom had dreamt that she would go hunting after a magnificent stag, and when he awoke, he wanted to go into the forest and hunt the stag. His newlywed wife implored him to stay there, and was afraid that something might happen to him. However, he said, "I must, and I shall go off." Upon saying this, he got up and went to the forest. He soon saw a proud stag standing before him, just as in his dream. But when he took an aim and was about to shoot, the stag began to flee. The golden man went after him and followed him over ditches and through bushes the entire day and wasn't tired. Yet the deer evaded him, and the young man soon found himself in front of a witch's house. He called out and asked whether she had seen the stag. She answered, "Yes," while the witch's small dog kept barking at him without stopping. So he became angry and wanted to shoot it. We've all been there. When the witch saw this, she changed the young man into a millstone. And at that very moment, the golden Larry perished and the golden goose home. When the other brother saw this, he mounted his golden steed and raced away and came upon the witch. He threatened her with death unless she restored his brother to his natural form. So the witch had to obey, and the two brothers rode home together. The first one to his bride, the other to his father. In the meantime, the golden lily revived itself as if the lilies hadn't perished, since both of them were still standing. Is there a moral to that somewhere? Because I'm not seeing it. I just don't see it. I guess not all stories have morals. No, that one had a moral to it. It was stop questioning where your husband's randomly getting wealth. Admittedly, I could see the wife's point. She's kind of sitting there in a nice little hut, and all of a sudden, boom! Castle out of nowhere, and she's in the middle of it. Yeah. But she had to nag and nag and nag and nag. Because that's what happens in fairy tales, clearly. Yeah. I read pretty sure I've read Alfred before. This one's got a series of fairly short ones. It's just all labeled under the Simpleton. Because, simpletons. Common clay of the Old West. Morons. I can't get that thought out of my head. Cubs, if you don't know where it's from, watch Blazing Saddles. If you do know where it's from, Mongolite candy. Okay. Speaking of Mongo, the Simpleton. Yeah, here we go. Okay, the Simpleton. First story on here is it's called The White Dove. So, there was once a splendid pear tree that stood in front of a king's castle, and each year it produced the most beautiful fruit. However, as soon as the pears became ripe, they were taken that very night, and nobody knew who the thief was. Now the king had 3 sons. The youngest among them was considered simple-minded and called Simpleton. And once again, Ashlad shows up. The oldest was ordered by the king to guard the tree for 1 year, so that the thief could be caught. He did this and watched every night. As soon as the fruit was in full bloom and the tree was full of fruit, and as the pears began to turn ripe, he kept watch even more diligently. Finally, the pears were completely ripe and were about to be picked the next day. However, on that night, the king's son became drowsy and fell asleep. When he awoke, every single one of the pears was tree. Only the leaves were left. Then the king commanded the second son to keep watch for a year. However, he didn't fare any better than his older brother. On the last night, he couldn't fend off sleep, and the next morning, all the pears had been picked. Finally, the king ordered Simpleton to keep watch for a year. Everyone at the king's court laughed about this. Nevertheless, Simpleton kept watch, and in the last night he resisted sleep and saw how a white dove came and carried off the pears, one by one. The dove made off with the last one. Simpleton stood up and followed it to the top of a high mountain, where it disappeared into a crack among the cliffs. Simpleton looked around him, and suddenly a little gray man was standing next to him. As little gray men are off to do. "God bless you," said Simpleton. "God has already blessed me in this very moment with your words," answered the little gray man. "You have released me from a magic spell. Now, if you climb down the cliff, your fortune will be made." So Simpleton climbed down the rocks. Many steps led him to the bottom, where he saw the white dove trapped and entangled in a spider's web. When the bird caught sight of him, it ripped through the web, and after the last thread had been torn, a beautiful princess stood before him. The simpleton had also released her from a spell, and she became his wife, and he a rich king who ruled the country with wisdom. Yeah. Anyway. Next story be the Queen Bee. So, the Queen Bee. Once, 2 princes went in search of adventure, and after they fell into a wild, decadent way of life, they never returned home again. And their youngest brother, who was called Simpleton, went out to look for them. But when he finally found them, they ridiculed him for thinking that he, so naive as he was, could make his way in the world when they, who were much more clever, had not been able to succeed. After a while, the 3 of them traveled together and came to an ant hill. The 2 oldest wanted to smash it and watch the little ants crawl around in fright and carry away their eggs. But Simpleton said, Let the little creatures live in peace. I won't let you disturb them." So they continued on their way, and came to a lake where many great ducks were swimming. The 2 brothers wanted to catch a few and roast them, but Simpleton said again, "Let the creatures live in peace. I won't let you kill them." Finally, they came to a beehive, and there was so much honey in the hive that it dripped down the tree trunk. The 2 older brothers wanted to build a small fire beneath it to suffocate the bees to get to the honey. However, Simpleton prevented them again and said, "Let the creatures in peace. I won't let you burn them." Soon the 3 brothers came to a castle, and they saw nothing but stone horses standing in the stables. Not a living soul could be seen. They went through the halls until they reached the end, where there was one door with 3 locks hanging on it. In the middle of the door was a peephole, through which one could look into the room. And they saw a little gray man sitting at the table. They called to him once, then twice, but he didn't hear them. Finally, they called the third time, and he got up and came out. However, he didn't say a word. Instead, he just led them to a table richly spread with food, and after they had something to eat and drink, he brought each of them to his own bedroom. The next morning, the little gray man went to the oldest brother, beckoned to him, and conducted him to a stone tablet on which were inscribed 3 tasks he had to do to be performed in the castle before he was to be disenchanted. The first task involved gathering 1,000 pearls that were lying in the moss of the forest. They belonged to the king's daughter and had been picked up by the moss before sundown. If one single pearl had been missing, the seeker would be turned to stone. The prince went to the moss and searched the entire day, but when the day drew to an end, he had only found 100. Consequently, he was turned to stone. The next day, the second brother undertook the adventure, but he didn't fare much better than the oldest. He only found 200 pearls and was turned to stone. Finally, it was Simpleton's turn to search for the pearls in the moss. However, since it was difficult to find them, and everything went so slowly, he sat down on a stone and began to weep. While he was sitting on the stone and weeping, the king of the ants, whose life he had once saved, came along with 5,000 ants. And it didn't take long for the little creatures had gathered the pearls together and stacked them in a pile. Now the second task involved fetching a key at the bedroom of the king's daughter from the lake. When Simpleton came to the lake, the ducks whose lives he had once saved came swimming towards him, and they dived down to fetch the key from the bottom of the lake. Next came the third task, which was the hardest. The king had 3 daughters who lay asleep, and Simpleton had to pick out the youngest and loveliest. That's a hard task right there. However, they all looked exactly alike, and the only difference between them was each one had eaten a different kind of sweets before falling asleep. The oldest had eaten a pear of sugar, the second a little syrup, the youngest a spoonful of honey. Just then the queen bee whom Simpleton had protected from the fire came along and tasted the lips of all 3. At last she settled on the mouth of the princess who had eaten the honey. Thus the prince was able to become the right daughter, recognized as the right daughter. Now the magic spell was broken, and everyone was set free from the deep sleep. All of those who had been turned to stone regained their human form. Simpleton married the youngest and loveliest daughter and became king after her father's death, while his 2 brothers were married to the other 2 sisters. Okay. How many people had tried? No. The next one, the 3 feathers. Yeah, the 3 feathers. Once upon a time, there was a king who decided to send off his 3 sons into the world. However, he would bring them the finest woven linen as to take over the realm after his death. Consequently, he went outside in front of the castle and blew 3 feathers into the air so that they would know what direction they should go. He told each one to follow the flight of his feather. One feather flew to the west and was followed by the oldest son. The next was cast to the east and followed by the second son. However, the third feather flew and fell to a stone not far from the palace. So the third son, the Simpleton, had to remain behind. His 2 brothers made fun of him and said that they should each search for the linen beneath a stone. Meanwhile, Simpleton sat down on the stone and wept, and as he swayed back and forth, the stone slid away, and beneath it was a marble slab with a ring on top. Simpleton lifted the slab and discovered some stairs that led below. So when he went down, he came to a subterranean vault, where he found a maiden sitting and weaving flax. She asked him why his eyes were so wet from the tears, and he revealed his sorrows to her and told her that he had to find the finest woven linen and had not been able to set out and search for it. When the woman reeled off her yarn, and at once he saw the most splendid woven linen, and she told him to bring it up to his father. When he came up from the ground, he had already been gone for so long, and his brothers had just returned and thought they had surely brought the finest woven linen back to their father. However, each one of them showed their linen. Simpleton's turned out to be much finer, and the realm would have been his, but the brothers were not satisfied and insisted their father set another condition. So the king demanded the most beautiful carpet, and once again blew 3 feathers into the air, and the third fell on the stone again. So Simpleton was prevented from setting out while the others went to the east and west. Simpleton lifted the stone and went down the vault again, and the maiden was weaving a marvelously beautiful carpet out of blazing colors, and when she was done, "I made this for you. Carry it up to your father. No one in the world will have such a fine carpet." So he appeared before his father, and once again surpassed his brothers, who had brought the most carpets from many different countries, and then insisted again that their father set another condition to who would inherit the realm. And the king now demanded that they must bring the most beautiful woman back home. The feathers were blown once more, and Simpleton's landed on the stone. And when he went down beneath the ground and complained to the maiden how his father had once more set a different condition, the maiden said she would gladly help him. All he had to do was go to the father in the vault, and he would find the most beautiful woman in the world. What's wrong with the maiden? No. Simpleton went down into the vault, and came to a room glittering and flickering with gold and jewels. But instead of beautiful woman, there was a nasty frog sitting in the middle. The frog called out to him, "Embrace me and immerse yourself." uh, I hope your mind didn't go where I went, Cubs. But he didn't want to do this, so the frog called out a second time, "Embrace me and immerse yourself." So Simpleton grabbed hold of the frog and carried it above to a pond where he jumped into the water with the frog. Oh, okay. Someone's getting wet. However, no sooner did he touch the water than he held the most beautiful woman in his arms. Then they climbed out of the water, and he brought her to his father. And she was 1,000 times more beautiful than the woman whom the other princes had brought home with him. Once again, the realm would have been belonged to Simpleton, but the 2 brothers made a racket and demanded that whoever's beautiful woman could jump into the ring and that was hanging in the middle of the hall would inherit the realm. Okay, this is a woman competing this time. The eldest son's woman could jump only halfway. The second son's woman jumped a bit higher, but the third son's woman jumped right up to the ring, because she was a frog. So the 2 older brothers finally had to agree that Simpleton would inherit the realm, right after his father's death. And when the father died, Simpleton became king, and ruled with wisdom for a long time. What that tongue do, princess? This is a whole embrace me and immerse yourself. I just can't get over that. Nothing clarified on what to immerse yourself in. But, sorry, I had a frog in my throat. The Golden Goose. Oh, Grimmy. The Golden Goose. Once upon a time, there was a man who had 3 sons, as often happens. However, the youngest was a simpleton. One day the oldest son said, "Father, I want to go into the world and chop wood." "Let it be," said the father. "Otherwise, you'll come home to a bandaged arm." So the son didn't pay attention to his father and thought he knew how to take care of himself. He put some cake in his pocket and went to the forest, where he met a little old gray man who said, "I'm hungry. Give me a piece of the cake you have in your pocket." "Pockets is precious." However, the clever son responded, "Why should I give you a piece of my cake? Then I'll have nothing for myself. Get out of here." The son went off with his axe and began to chop down a tree. It didn't take long, however, for him to make a slip with the axe, and he cut himself in the arm. So he had to go home and have his arm bandaged. This was all because of the little gray man. Likely story. Some time later, the second son went into the forest, where the little gray man asked him for a piece of cake too. He also refused, and consequently struck himself in the leg, so that he had to be carted back home. Finally, Simpleton went out to the forest, and the little man spoke to him just as he had the others, and asked for a piece of cake. "You can have the entire thing," said the Simpleton, and gave it to him. Then the little man spoke, "Chop down this tree, and you'll find something." Simpleton began hacking, and when the tree fell, a golden goose was sitting there. He took the bird with him and went to the inn, where he wanted to spend the night. He didn't want to stay in the large room, rather, he wanted a room for himself alone. Once there, he set the goose in the middle of the room. The innkeeper's daughter had seen the goose and was curious and would have liked to have a feather from the goose. Then the oldest daughter said, "I'll go upstairs. If I don't return soon, then come after me." Upon saying this, she went to the goose, but no sooner did she touch the feather than she found herself attached to the goose. Now, since she didn't come back down, the second sister went up to look after her, and as soon as she saw the goose, she couldn't resist the desire to pluck a feather. The eldest sister tried her best to warn her not to do this, but nothing helped. Her sister grabbed hold of the goose, and was soon attached to the feather. Now, after the third daughter had waited long enough, she finally went upstairs, and her sisters called out to her and warned her, "For heaven's sake, don't come near the goose." However, she didn't listen to them, and was set on having one of the feathers, and got stuck. The next morning, Simpleton took the goose in his right arm and went off. 3 daughters were tightly attached to the goose and had to follow him. When they came to a field, they met a parson who cried out, "Phooey, naughty girls! You deserve a spanking. What are you doing running after this young fellow, in public no less? Shame on you! Shame! 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 Shame!" I'm bored. Anyway, upon saying this, he grabbed one of the girls by the hand and tried to yank her away. However, as soon as he touched her, he became stuck to her, and now had to run along behind them. Shortly after this happened, a sexton came and cried out, "Hey, parson, where are you off to in such a hurry? We still have a christening today." The sexton ran up to him and grabbed him by the arm, and became attached. As the 5 of them marched on after Simpleton, 2 farmers with their hoes came into a field. Those dirty hoes. The parson called them over to help detach themselves, but no sooner did they touch the sexton than they got stuck, and now there were 7 who ran after Simpleton with the goose. Soon he came to a city ruled by a king who had a daughter so serious that nobody could get her to laugh. Consequently, the king issued a decree declaring anyone who made the princess laugh would have her as his bride. When Simpleton heard this, he went to the king's daughter and took along a goose with a group of people attached to the bird. As soon as the princess saw this parade, she began to laugh boisterously and couldn't stop. Therefore, Simpleton demanded to have her for his bride. But the king made all kinds of excuses and said Simpleton would first have to bring him a man who could drink up all the wine in the cellar. I volunteered. No. So Simpleton went to the forest to the spot where he had chopped down the tree, and he saw a man sitting there with a sad face. So Simpleton asked him what had caused him to have such a heavy heart. "Oh, I'm so thirsty, and I can't get enough to drink. I've already emptied a barrel of wine, but that's not like a drop on a hot stone." "Well, I can help you," Simpleton said. "Come with me, and you'll be able to drink until you're full." The Simpleton led him to the king's cellar, and the man set to work on the large barrels. He drank and drank until his lips began to hurt him, and before the day was over, he had drunk up everything in the cellar. Now, Simpleton demanded his bride, but the king was annoyed that a common fellow, whom everyone called Simpleton, could carry off such a daughter. And so he set a new condition. Simpleton had to produce a man who could eat a mountain of bread. So Simpleton returned to the forest, and there was a man sitting on the spot in the tree where he had cut down. This man was tightening a belt around his waist and making an awful face. "I've eaten an oven of coarse bread, and what good is that? I'm still enormously hungry. I don't feel a thing in my body. I must tighten my belt. If not, I'll die of hunger." As soon as Simpleton heard this, he was cheerful and said, "Get up and come with me. You'll eat until you're full." Simpleton led the man to the king, who had all the flour in the entire kingdom gathered and baked into an enormous mountain. But the man from the forest took a place in front of it, and he caused the entire mountain to vanish in a day and a night. He did not loaf about. Once again, Simpleton asked for his bride, but the king sought out a way to mend a ship that could sail in water and on land. If he produced the ship, then he could have the princess right away. So Simpleton went back into the forest once more and met the little gray man whom he had given the cake. "I've drunk and eaten for you," the little man said. "Now I'll give you the ship. I'm giving you this because you were kind and took pity on me." So he gave Simpleton a ship that sailed on land and on water. And when the king saw this, he could no longer prevent him from marrying his daughter. Then the wedding was celebrated, and Simpleton inherited the realm and lived a long, happy time with his wife. A ship that could sail on land and water. Nice. Let's see. I'm going to go in for an hour. Wow. Okay. Cubbies. Cubby, 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 cubby. Cubby. Cubby! Yeah, so, there's that. The next one is Ulfer. Because you gotta love the names. Ulfer. Because, he's covered in fur. So, like me. But I'm not Ulfer. Yeah, okay. So, Ulfer. Because it's all for one and all for love. Okay. Try this again. Ulfer. Once upon a time, there was a king who had the most beautiful wife in the world, and her hair was pure gold. They had a daughter together, and she was just as beautiful as her mother, and her hair was just as golden. One day, the queen became sick, and when she felt that she was about to die, she called her king to her and made a request. If after my death you wanted to marry again, you should only take someone who was as beautiful as she was and had golden hair like hers. Once the king promised that, she died. For a long time, the king was so distressed that he didn't think about a second wife. Finally, his counselors urged him to remarry, so messengers were sent to all the princesses in the world, but none of them were as beautiful as the dead queen, nor could they find such golden hair anywhere in the world. Now, one day the king cast his eyes on his daughter. I'm going to continue reading this one, but yeah. And when he saw that her features were similar to those of her mother, and that she also had such golden hair, he thought, since you won't find another beautiful one as since you won't find anyone as beautiful in the world, you must marry your daughter. And right then he felt such great love for her that he immediately informed his counselors and the princess of his decision. The counselors wanted to talk him out of it, but it was in vain. The princess was totally horrified about this godless intention. However, since she was smart, and she told the king that he first had to provide her with 3 dresses, one as golden as the sun, one as white as the moon, and one as bright as all the stars. Then the cloak made of 1,000 kinds of pelts and furs of each animal, and the kingdom had to contribute a piece of skin to it. The king had such a passionate desire for her that everyone in the realm was ordered to work. His huntsman had to catch all the animals and take a piece of their skin. Thus a cloak was made from their fur, and it didn't take long before the king brought the princess what she had demanded. Now the princess said that she would marry him the next day. However, during the night, she collected the gifts that she had received from her fiancé from another kingdom. A golden ring, a little gold spinning wheel, and a little golden reel, and the 3 dresses, all of which she put into a nutshell. Then she blackened her face and hands on the spot, put on the cloak made of all kinds of fur, and departed. She walked the whole night until she reached the great forest where she was safe. Since she was tired, she climbed into the hollow of a tree and fell asleep. She continued to sleep until it became broad daylight. As it so happened, the king, her bridegroom, as she had never met her fiancé apparently, was out hunting in the forest. When his dogs came upon the tree, they started to sniff and run around it. The king sent his huntsman to see what kind of animal was hiding in the tree. When they returned to him, they said there was a strange animal lying in it, and they had never seen anything like it before in the forest. Its skin was made up of 1,000 different kinds of fur, and it was lying there, asleep. Then the king ordered them to catch it and tie it to the back of the wagon. The huntsmen did this, and as they pulled it from the tree, they saw it was a maiden. Then they tied her to the back of the wagon and drove her home. "Oh, fur," they said, "you do well to work in the kitchen. You can carry wood and water and sweep the ashes. Then they gave her a little stall beneath the steps. You can live and sleep there. So she had to work in the kitchen, where she helped the cook, plucked the chickens, tended the fire, sorted the vegetables, did all the dirty work. Since she did everything so diligently, the cook was very good to her and sometimes called Ulfer to him in the evening and gave her some of the leftovers to eat. Before the king went to bed, she had to go upstairs and pull off his boots, and as soon as she would pull the one off, would immediately throw it at her head. And so Ulfer led a miserable life for a long time. Ah, you beautiful maiden, what shall become of you? At one time a ball was held in the castle, and Ulfer thought, perhaps now I could see my dear bridegroom once again. So she went to the cook and asked him to follow her upstairs for a while in the splendor of the doorway. Go ahead, said the cook, but you can't stay any longer than half an hour. You've got to sweep up the ashes tonight. So Ulfer took her little oil lamp and went into the little stall and washed off the soot from her face until her beauty came to light again, like flowers in the springtime. Then she took off the fur cloak, opened the nuts, took out the dress that shone like the sun. When she was fully dressed, she went upstairs, and everyone made way for her, for they believed she was nothing less than a distinguished princess who had come just for the ball. The king immediately offered her his hand and led her forth to dance. And as he was dancing with her, he thought, this unknown princess resembles my dear bride. And the longer he gazed at her, the more she resembled her, so that he was almost certain it was her. When the dance ended, he wanted to ask. However, as she finished the dance, she curtsied and disappeared before the king could speak to her. Then he asked the guards, but nobody had seen the princess leave the castle. She had quickly run to her little stall, taken off her dress, and blackened her face and hands, and put the fur cloak on once again. Then she went back to the kitchen and started to sweep the ashes. Let it be until morning, the cook said. I want to go upstairs and take a look at the dance. Make a soup for the king, but don't let any hairs fall in it, otherwise he'll get nothing more to eat. Ulfer cooked a bread soup for the king, and in the end she slipped the little golden ring that the king had given her as a present into the soup. When the ball came to an end, the king had his bread soup brought to him. It tasted so good that he was convinced that he had never eaten so good. However, when he finished, he found the ring at the bottom of the bowl. He looked at it carefully. He saw that it was his wedding ring and was puzzled, as this was the ring that the king had given his fiancée as a gift. He couldn't grasp how the ring came to be there, and so he had the cook summoned. The cook became angry with Ulfer. You must have certainly let a hair fall into this soup. If that's true, you'll get a beating. However, when the cook went upstairs, the king asked him who had cooked the soup, because it had been better than usual. So the cook had to confess that Ulfer had made it. The king ordered him to send Ulfer up to him. When she came, the king said, Who are you, and what are you doing in my castle? Where did you get the ring that was in the soup? Then she replied, I'm nothing more but a poor child whose mother and father are dead. I am nothing. I am no good for nothing except having boots thrown at my head. I also know nothing about the ring. Upon saying this, she ran away. Sometime later, there was another ball, and once again Ulfer asked the cook's permission to go upstairs. The cook allowed her, but only for an hour and a half. And then she was to return and cook some bread soup for the king. So Ulfer went to her little stall, washed herself clean, and took out the dress as silvery as the moon, and cleaner, more sparkling than fallen snow. When she appeared upstairs, the dance had already begun. The king offered her his hand again and danced with her. He no longer doubted that this was the bride, for nobody in the world except her had such golden hair. However, when the dance was over, the princess had already departed again, and despite his efforts, the king couldn't find her, and he hadn't spoken a single word to her. Indeed, she was Ulfer again, with blackened hand and face. She stood in the kitchen and cooked the bread soup for the king, while the cook went upstairs to watch the dance. When the soup was done, she put the golden spinning wheel into the bowl. How? The king ate the soup, and it seemed even better this time. When he found the golden spinning wheel at the bottom, he was even more astounded because he had at one time sent this to his bride as a present. The cook was summoned again, then Ulfer, but once again she replied that she knew nothing about it, and that she was only there to have boots thrown at her head. When the king held a ball for the third time, he hoped his bride would come again, and he wanted to make sure to hold on to her. Ulfer asked the cook again to let her go upstairs, but he scolded her and said, "You're a witch. You always put something on the soup and can cook it better than I do." Or you're just a lousy-ass cook. However, she pleaded so passionately and promised to behave herself. He let her go upstairs again for half an hour. Thereupon she put on the dress that sparkled as bright as the stars do at night, went upstairs and danced with the king. He thought he had never seen her more beautiful. As they were dancing, however, he slipped a ring into her finger and ordered the dance to last for a very long time. Nevertheless, he couldn't hold on to her, nor could he speak a single word to her. But when the dance was over, she mingled with the people so quickly that she vanished before he turned around. Ulfer ran to her little stall. Since she had been away longer than half an hour, she undressed quickly and had hurried to couldn't blacken her face completely so that her finger remained white. When she went into the kitchen and the cook was already upstairs. She quickly cooked the bread soup and put the golden reel into it. Just as he had found the ring and the golden spinning wheel, the king also found the reel. Now he knew for sure that his bride was nearby, for nobody else could have possessed those presents. Ulfer was summoned and wanted once again to avoid the king and run away. However, as she tried to run off, the king caught sight of the white finger on her hand and held her tight. He found the ring that had slipped onto the finger and tore off the fur cloak. Then her golden hair toppled down, and she was his dearly beloved bride. Now the cook was richly rewarded, and the king held the wedding, and they lived happily until their death. Just to be clear, the king in the story that married her was not her father. He was a sugar daddy. Let's do 2 more stories. Okay? That's acquiesce to your cubs. Okay. Okay. This name is just Hurleburlebutz. It's the Hurleburlebutz. Okay, I got it. This is Hurleburlebutz. All one word. Hurleburlebutz. Once a king got lost during a hunt, and suddenly a little white dwarf appeared before him. "Your Majesty," he said, "if you give me your youngest daughter, I will show you how to get out of the forest." The king consented out of fear, and the dwarf helped him find his way. As he took leave of the king, he cried out, "I'll be coming to fetch my bride in a week. Hee hee." When the king reached home, he was sad about his promise because his youngest daughter was his favorite. She's a daddy's girl, clearly. His daughters noticed how sad he was and wanted to know what the cause of his worry was. Finally, he had to tell them what he had promised his youngest daughter to a little white dwarf in the forest, and that dwarf would be coming to fetch her in a week. However, they told him to cheer up, for they would lead the dwarf on a wild goose chase. When the day of the dwarf's arrival, he dressed as a cowherd's daughter. Tries again. When the day came for the dwarf's arrival, they dressed in cowherd's daughter in their clothes and sat her down in their room. If someone comes to fetch you, you're to go with them, they ordered, and they themselves left the house. No sooner had they left, a fox entered the castle and said to the maiden, "Sit down on my furry tail, Hurleburlebutz." Off to the forest. Hurleburlebutz. The maiden sat down on the fox's tail, and he carried her out into the forest. When they came to a beautiful clearing, where the sun was shining very brightly and warm, the fox said, "Get off and take the lice out of my hair." The maiden followed his orders, and the fox laid his head on her lap so she could louse him. While she was doing this, the maiden said, "When I was in the forest yesterday about this time, it was more beautiful." "What were you doing in the forest?" the fox said. "Oh, I was tending cows with my father." "You are not the princess. Sit down on my furry tail, Hurleburlebutz. Back to the castle." The fox carried her back and said to the king, "You deceived me. That was a cowherd's daughter. I'll come again in a week and fetch your daughter." At the end of the week, the princess dressed a gooseherd's daughter in the same splendid gardens, sat her down, and went away. Then the fox came in and said, "Sit down on my furry tail, Hurleburlebutz." Off to the forest. When they arrived in a sunny spot in the forest, the fox said once more, "Get off and take the lice out of my hair." As the maiden was lousing the fox, she sighed and said, "I wonder where my geese are now." "What do you know about geese?" "Oh, I take them to the meadow every day with my father." "So, you're not the king's daughter?" "Sit down on my furry tail, Hurleburlebutz. Back to the castle." The fox carried her back and said to the king, "You deceived me again. That was a gooseherd's daughter. I'm going to come back in a week, and if you don't give me your daughter, you'll be in for trouble." The king was frightened, and when the fox returned, he gave him the princess. "Sit down on my furry tail, Hurleburlebutz." Off to the forest. She had to ride the fox's tail, but when they got to the sunny place, he said to her, "Get off my tail and take the lice out of my hair." However, when he laid his head on her lap, the princess began to cry and said, "I'm a king's daughter, and yet I must louse a fox. If I were sitting at home right now, I'd be looking at the flowers in my garden." Then the fox knew he had the right bride and turned himself into the little white dwarf. He was now her husband, and she had to live with him in a little hut and sew and cook for him. This lasted a good long time, and the dwarf did everything he could to please her. One day the dwarf said to her, "I've got to go away, but 3 white doves will soon be coming flying here. When they swoop down to the ground, catch the middle one. Once you've got it, cut off its head right away. But pay attention and make sure you've got the middle dove, or else it'll be a disaster." The dwarf departed, and it didn't take long for the 3 white doves to fly towards her. The princess paid close attention, grabbed the middle one. She took a knife and cut off its head. No sooner was the dove lying on the ground than a handsome young prince stood before her and said, A fairy cast a spell over me, causing me to lose my human form for 7 years. Then I was to fly by my wife as a dove between 2 other doves, and she would have to catch me and cut off my head. If she didn't catch me, or she caught another and I flew away, then everything would be lost and I would never be saved. That's why I asked you to pay attention to me, for I'm the little white dwarf, and you're my wife. The princess was delighted, and together they went to their father. When he died, they inherited the kingdom. Ride my tail, Hurleburlebutz. What are those people riding a fox's tail? I mean, it's riding on a fox's tail. What the hell is with Hurleburlebutz? Hurleburlebutz, ride the fox's tail. Oh well. Let's see. Yep. Read 2 more stories because I am seriously indecisive on how long I'm going to read. It's been an hour and a half. Okay. I'm going to read 2 more stories. Then we'll end for the night and see if we can pass on the love. I mean, raid with, like, me. Anyway. The King with the Lion. A young prince sat down with his bride-to-be and said, I'm going to give you a ring and my picture, and I want you to carry these things with you to remember me and remain true to me. My father is deathly ill and has asked me to come to him. He wants to see me one more time before he dies, and I become king. So I want you to go home now. Upon saying this, the prince rode off and found his father on his deathbed. Right before he died, he asked his son to marry a particular princess after his death. The prince was so depressed and loved his father so much that, without even thinking about it, he said yes, and right after the king closed his eyes, he died. After he was acclaimed king and the mourning period ended, he had to keep his word and ask permission to the court's other princesses who had been promised to him. Meanwhile, his first bride had heard the prince was courting other princesses, and she grieved so much that she almost died. Her father asked her why she was so sad, and told her all she had to do was ask him what she wanted, and her wish would be granted. So the princess reflected for a moment. Then she asked for 11 young women who completely resembled her in size as well as stature. So the king had his men search for 11 young women throughout the entire kingdom. And when they were all together, she dressed herself in hunter's clothes, and had the 11 dressed the same, so that they all 12 could look completely alike. Shortly thereafter, she rode to the king, her former bridegroom, and requested a position for herself and the other hunters. The king didn't recognize her, but because they were such handsome people, he gladly granted the request and welcomed them to his court. Get you a princess who can be both. Now the king had a lion, and nothing could be kept from him. This lion knew all the secrets of the court. One evening the lion said to the king, You believe you've employed 12 hunters, but they're actually 12 young women. The king refused to believe him, but the lion added, Have peas spread out in your anteroom one time. Men have a heavy step, and if they walk over the peas, none of the peas will move. But women, they skip and shuffle, and the peas roll beneath their feet. Is that true? The king liked this plan, But one of the king's servants loved the hunters and overheard this, so he ran to the young women and said, "The lion thinks you're all women and want the peas spread out to the anteroom to test you." Consequently, the princess ordered her 11 young ladies to use all their might and firmly stomp on the peas. When it turned morning, the peas were all spread about. The king summoned the 12 hunters, but they had such firm and strong gait that not a single pea moved or survived. That evening, the king reproached the lion and accused him of lying. In response, the lion said, "They covered up who they really are. Now just have 12 spinning wheels set up in the anteroom, and they'll show you how pleased they are. No man would ever want to do that." The king followed the lion's advice once more and had the spinning wheels set up in the room. However, the servant revealed to the hunters what was happening, so that the princesses ordered the young ladies once more not to look at the spinning wheels at all. So that's what they did, and the king refused to believe the lion any more. He became more and more fond of the hunters, and when hunting, they had to go along with him. One time, when they were out in the forest, news arrived that the prince's bride was coming, and that she would soon be there. When the prince's real bride heard this, she fainted. The king thought something had happened to his dear hunter. He ran over and wanted to help him. As he took off his glove, he noticed that she was wearing the ring that he had given his first bride, and moreover, he saw the picture that she was carrying in her necklace. He recognized her and immediately notified the other bride to return home to her realm because he already found his wife. And when she recovers an old key, one doesn't need a new one. Soon after, the wedding was celebrated. It was clear that the lion had not lied, and once again found favor in the king's eyes. Imagine that. The big cat wasn't lying. Ha 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 ha. When are these royal fools going to start listening to the animals? We know. We watch. We observe. We're not as easily distracted by shiny things. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. Last story for the night, Cubs. Then you gotta go to bed. Please. Okay. The summer and the winter garden. A merchant wanted to go to a fair and asked his 3 daughters what he should bring back for them. The eldest said, "A beautiful dress." The second, "A pair of pretty shoes." Third, "A rose." But it was difficult to find a rose because it was midwinter. However, since the youngest was the most beautiful daughter and was so extremely fond of flowers, the father replied that he would see whether he could find a rose and would make every effort to do so. When the merchant was returning home from the fair, he gathered a splendid dress for the eldest, a pair of beautiful shoes for the second daughter, but he hadn't been able to obtain a rose for his youngest daughter. Each time he entered a garden and asked for roses, people had made fun of him and asked him whether he really wanted to grow roses in snow. When he was very sorry to hear that, but he was wondering whether they might have something that he could bring home for his favorite child. When he reached the castle, there was a garden on one side, in which it was half summer and half winter. On one side, the most beautiful large and small flowers were blooming. On the other side, everything was bare and lay deep snow lay on the ground. He got off his horse, and since he noticed the entire hedge full of roses on the summer side, he was glad and went over there. Then he plucked a rose and got on his horse and began riding away. He had only ridden a short distance when he heard something running behind him and panting. So he turned around and saw a large black beast that shouted, "Return my rose to me, or I'll kill you! Return my rose to me, or I'll kill you!" The man replied, "Let me keep the rose. I'm supposed to bring it to my daughter. She's the most beautiful maiden in the world. If you like, but in exchange, but I want to give you my beautiful..." What? If you like? Okay, that's the beast talking. If you like, but in exchange, I want you to give me your beautiful daughter as my wife. In order to get rid of the beast, the man said yes, and he thought he wouldn't come demand his daughter, but the beast yelled after him, "I'm coming to fetch my bride in a week." Now the merchant brought each of his daughters what she had wished. All of them were delighted. The youngest daughter was the most pleased by the rose. After a week had passed, the three sisters were sitting at the dinner table when all of a sudden noise of heavy footsteps came up the stairs and knocked on the door. "Open up! Open up!" he yelled. So they opened the door, and they were truly horrified when a large black beast entered. "Since my bride didn't come, and the time's up, I've come to fetch her myself." Upon saying that, he went to the youngest daughter and grabbed her. She began to scream, but that didn't help at all. She had to go off with him, and when her father came back home, he found the dearest child had been kidnapped. Meanwhile, the black beast carried the beautiful maiden to his castle, which was quite wonderful and beautiful. There were musicians who had begun playing. Below was a garden that was half summer and half winter, and the beast did everything to make her feel comfortable, and one could read from her eyes how pleased she was. They ate together, and she had to ladle out the food for him, otherwise he couldn't eat. The beast thought she was precious, and eventually became very fond of the beast. One day she said to him, "I've become very anxious. I don't know why, but I feel as though my father were ill. Or perhaps one of my sisters is sick. Couldn't I see them just one time?" So the beast led her to a mirror and said, "Look into the mirror." And when she looked in the mirror, it was as if she were home. She saw her room and her father, who was really sick from heartbreak. Indeed, he felt guilty that a wild beast had kidnapped his daughter, and had probably been devoured by him. If he had known how well she was, he wouldn't have been depressed. She also saw her two sisters at her father's bedside, and they were weeping. All of this troubled her heart, and she asked the beast whether she might let her return home for a few days. "Go to your father, but promise me that you'll return within a week." She promised him, and said she was leaving, and called her father, but don't stay, called after her, "But don't stay any longer than a week." When she returned home, her father rejoiced that he was able to see her one more time. But the illness and sorrow had eaten away at his heart too much. Consequently, he couldn't regain his health and died after a couple days later. His daughter couldn't think of anything else due to her grief, and before her father was buried, she went to the corpse and wept to her sisters, and they consoled her. Finally, when she thought about her dear beast again, more than a week had gone by. All of a sudden she became really anxious, and she felt as though he were sick. She immediately set out and went directly to the castle. When she arrived there once again, the castle was completely silent and sad. The musicians weren't playing. Everything was draped in black. The garden was now completely winter and covered in snow. When she went to look for the beast, he was gone. She searched all over the place, but couldn't find him. Now she was doubly distressed and didn't know how to console herself. Sadly, she went to the garden and saw a heap of cabbage leaves. The ones on top were already old and rotten. She spread them about, and when she turned over a few, she saw her dear beast, who had been lying under them, and he was dead. Quickly she shed some water, and continually poured water on him. All of a sudden, he jumped up, and was suddenly changed into a handsome prince. A wedding was held, and the musicians immediately began playing. The summer side of the garden became splendid again. Black drapes were torn down, and they lived happily ever after. Okay. So that was clearly Beauty and the Beast. And a Grimm's Fairy Tale book. Right. So, Cubby Cubbies. We did an hour 45. Got a few good stories in there. So, no one came in. Many Pokemon fled. Do I want to raid anyone? Who's not to raid? Oh, Ping's on. Anyone else? I know. I mean, technically, raid Beano, but what the fun doing that? I might just close it for the night. Not really anyone up for raiding, I guess. I can go watch Pang, but what? Twitch is getting rid of the friends list? That sucks, donkey. It's crazy. How are we supposed to know what our friends are watching? Though Spark is watching Beano sleep. Is there anything going on in our chat at all? Nope. There are still 80 people watching it. Yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and close the road for the night. I'll close the stream. So, yeah, what? Tales were told, stories were spun. Several stories of a Simpleton. And we ended with, Beauty and the Beast. So, I guess we're gonna say goodnight, Cubbies. I mean, it's kind of a short night for us, but not really up to rating, and not really sure who would rate anyway. So, make sure one more time to see if anyone's on. I'm not really doing anything I'd want to interrupt. So, yeah. Have a good night, Cubs. Pleasant dreams.